I'm Larry Blumenfeld. I'm the jazz curator at Spoleto Festival USA. This is the first of 2 jazz talks that we're doing this season. The second one will be June 7th with the percussionist and singer Pedrito Martinez. But please, first just help me welcome Terri Lyne Carrington, who's joined us today. Now, how many of you were at Cistern Yard last night? So then, okay, good. So then you're aware that, because you really got the full spectrum of drummer, composer, band leader, lyricist, producer, band leader, educator, activist. All of those things happened during the course of those 90 minutes. First, before we get down to talking, I'll embarrass Terri Lyne a little bit by talking about her. So she is, we could call her a master, and the National Endowment for the Arts has awarded her, it has called her a jazz master, which is the highest recognition in this country that a jazz musician gets. 4-time Grammy winner, Doris Duke Artist Award winner. Terri Lyne Carrington started her career in music, professional career, at age 10 when you got your union card in Boston? At age 10. By 11, she had earned a full scholarship to Berklee College of Music. And that precocious brilliance has animated a career that spanned more than 4 decades, that's led to appearances on more than 100 recordings, that's involved high-profile work with jazz and pop stars like Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Chaka Khan, Natalie Cole, and last night you heard her with Dianne Reeves. So Terri Lyne is back at her old alma mater, Berklee, this time as founder and artistic director of the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, which takes as its motto, Jazz Without Patriarchy. A couple years ago, she authored 2 books, a children's book entitled 3 of a Kind, on the making of a great trio that she was 1/3 of, that we'll talk about a little bit, and a collection of, and New Standards, which is a collection of 101 compositions by female musicians and composers that really form a new book of jazz standards. So, maybe the best thing to do is to just start with what led to everything we experienced last night and all the manifestations of new standards before we talk about some deeper history. So, yeah, how did that idea for new standards begin?
Well, first, thanks for having me, and it's always nice to talk to you. You're one of the people that I feel really understands kind of the depth of the totality of it all, and so I always enjoy talking to you because the conversations.
And I should say that we do this we've done this in a number of places, so this is just kind of more, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
yes,
New Standards.
New Standards.
Where did that come from?
Well, when I started the Institute in, that's about to say 2018, we had an event, and I asked the students to play some songs written by women, and they could only come up with one common song that they knew, which was Willow Weep for Me, written by Anne Ronnell. So at that point, I knew that this would be our first major initiative as an institute to do this book, and it took a few years to put together. I started with people that I knew that I had played with, so I probably got about half of the music from people that I had already worked with, and then I wanted to round it out with more international artists. I wanted to span as far back as I could, so the first composition is from 1922, Lil Hardin Armstrongs, and also I wanted new composers, young composers represented, so we had a couple of students at the time submit as well. I wanted diversity within the genre, so some things that felt more new music or more avant-garde style, and then some things that are more like bebop, or some things that are more like funk jazz. And then also, diversity among the women themselves. So there was a lot of different, there's a lot of criteria. And yeah, so it took about 3 years.
So that, that's New Standards, the book, which
Right.
frankly, any musician who wants to play tunes should have that book. I will say there's a little bit of, yeah, we try to have a depth and richness to it all. So if you were there at the opening ceremony with the mayor when the confetti dropped, the Charleston Jazz Academy Advanced Ensemble, who played brilliantly, the tune they played, Respected Destroyer, was composed by the harpist Brandy Younger, and they learned it because we gave them a couple of copies of the book, and they learned it from the book. So, they were both playing music by Brandy Younger, who performed at this festival last year, and playing music out of the repertoire that, I remember 20, 30 years ago when it was a big deal for high school bands to get Ellington repertoire so they could really work with the music. But this is a next wave. And it's really similar to what happens in classical music too. Hey, this music isn't really part of the culture unless the musicians are reading it and playing it, right?
Well, correct. I mean, I think that's what makes it standard. People playing it, other than, back in the day, you have songs from shows,
Right.
from plays, and jazz musicians took those songs and played them their own way, and those became standards. But then you have new standards, by composers like Wayne Shorter and
Right.
Horace Silver and different ones, right? So that's definitely the way you make a standard. But I just want to kind of go back to say that the purpose of the book is because women were pretty much left out of the canon. And so that's why it became an initiative, because initially when I started the Institute, it was about playing and players and students at Berkeley that were not having a good experience as a woman trying to play jazz. People saying crazy things to them. And I guess I had been there for at least 10 years already and didn't realize how bad it was for so many of the women students. And then I remember specifically being invited to a meeting of Women in Jazz Collective, which was a student organization, and one young lady said she had overslept, and she got to her proficiency test, a final exam, and the teacher said, you really need to do your hair next time. And yeah, so after I asked her, made her tell me which teacher said that to her, and then after I talked myself out of going up to him and doing something I might have done 20 years ago, and I realized, no, Terri, you're too old to confront somebody like that. Let's do something else and create a place where that kind of thing won't happen.
So, right, the Institute, and really the totality of what you're doing with this project and this mission is also to change the culture. I remember when I first started writing about music, I would interview a lot of female artists, and they would say things like, hey, how come that person has to write about what I was wearing? Would they have written about that about a man? Why are they talking about my clothes before they're talking about my music? And, that,
Right.
I understood that point.
Well, that's why we say jazz without patriarchy, because it's just it's something that we aspire
Right.
for, because we really aspire for a society without patriarchy. Some people are invested in patriarchy. Some women are invested in patriarchy because, we've been socialized and kind of okay sometimes with how things are. But I think, and that's, if some people wanted to live their life a certain way, that's fine. But I think that we have to have freedom, equality, equity, all of those things, should be available so that anybody can pursue their dreams, whether it be in jazz or wherever. But the biggest thing is, as far as jazz, is the music itself will never reach its greatest, fullest potential until you have this kind of representation, because it's just not, we don't know yet
Right.
what it would sound like. And I mean, we've been so trained to think what's great is all of this unbelievably great music that has happened over history, and that is great, but we have not seen another aesthetic in the music penetrate it deeply. And until we see and hear what that could even sound like, I mean, I'm still training myself to try to listen differently. Because if you had said this to me 10 years ago, I would be like, what are you talking about? This is what's great, and that's it.
Right.
But then I had to grow and evolve and expand to understand that there is an aesthetic that has, been missing. And there's a bit of a hyper-masculinity that has been not just accepted, but, taught and kind of has been the thread, the fabric of the music, which is great, but there's space for other things. So I had to catch myself as a teacher, because I found that, if I had a young woman student, whether it's drums or another instrument, but especially with the drums, telling them to, hit a little harder, play a little stronger, go a little faster, all those things. And maybe they do need to do some of that, but I wasn't being open to whatever sound they were creating. So I had a student that made a recording, and she was somebody that a drummer from London, that I was saying that to, because I thought she had so much potential, and I wanted her to just take it over the top. And then she sent me a record she did, and I was just listening to it and vibing with it. And I thought to myself, wow, there's nothing wrong with this.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with it at all. And then I was, I won't say ashamed, but disappointed that I hadn't seen something different earlier, is I could have been a better teacher.
And maybe you were imposing a standard that wasn't correct for, yeah. I mean, when you
It
talk
wasn't
about,
about correct, it's just I was imposing the thing that was imposed upon me.
right,
And see, because women that are successful playing jazz are the ones that assimilate well. So I think that's where the space has to be made.
yeah, no, I
'cause,
remember,
you shouldn't have to, not just as a player, but even as a person hanging out, being on the scene. You shouldn't have to be. I mean, I'm a fighter. You shouldn't have to be that.
Right.
But I'm
Right.
naturally that.
right,
So I fit in okay, because I also wasn't necessarily intimidating either to people. So if you find that balance of being able to be one of the boys but not quite, when you find that balance in jazz, then those are the women that are successful. And it shouldn't be that way. You should be able to be whoever you authentically are and bring that to the music. But it's about training ourselves and encouraging others to start listening differently.
yeah, that hyper-masculinity you were talking about. I remember a long time ago I interviewed Cassandra Wilson about that moment that a lot of people came to New York in the 80s, and she was talking about arriving in New York, and said there were all these musicians bench pressing chord changes.
Yeah.
That's the way she put it.
Yeah.
And I knew what she meant. And then I've interviewed a lot of, across generations, musicians like Marion McPartland or even Jerry Allen, who, some early praise to them was, you play like a man. And it's like, well, what does that mean? I really, we've had some of these conversations before, and I love the way you put that about the potential for music that we haven't heard, because it's not just about representation. It's really about, okay, however great what we have is, it's incomplete, right? We
Absolutely.
haven't achieved completeness.
And we may never achieve completeness. That's why it's an aspiration. It's not even about a finish line. It's about just continually making space and being open and expanding and pushing our own boundaries to see what can happen. Wayne Shorter said, let me see, make sure I get this quote right. He said, let's not do something. He could be talking about playing or composing. Let's not do it because it works. Let's do it to see what will happen.
Right.
So I apply that to other things.
And Wayne, I should mention that Terri has been important to different important periods of Wayne Shorter's career. Wayne, one of the great players, composers, thinkers, leaders in our musical culture. I felt like Wayne always, or very early on, had a desire to have female players in his bands, and that was important to both his music, but also just important in general to him, right? Did he ever talk about that, or was it just something he did?
Yeah, the one thing he did when I heard him do an interview in the 80s, I think my first tour with him, and they said, well, you have a woman on drums and on percussion. Why? And he said, I read a lot of science fiction books and watch a lot of science fiction movies, and in the future, women and children are the leading. So he was trying to be in the future.
So we've talked a little bit about New Standards, the book, the repertoire, kind of the mission. So there's New Standards, the Grammy-winning album of some of those compositions, which you named Volume 1, meaning there'll be more, and New Standards, this band that we heard last night. Yeah, how does that spirit, obviously the music is being played by men and women, how does that idea manifest in recording and performing? Is there a difference between how you play and record this stuff than your earlier projects? Does it feel different? Does it end up different?
I'm not quite sure I understand, other than one thing I will say is with our mission, so when I did like the Mosaic Project, for instance, that was an all-female project, and it was to celebrate all these amazing women that I had worked with.
So that's like a little more than a dozen years ago, right? An album
over
of
the years, yeah. But I've grown since then, because when I did that project, I wasn't really thinking about it as far as gender justice. I hadn't put those two words together yet.
Angela Davis helped with that, right?
Yeah, definitely, yes. She told me, I was trying to name the institute, and I was having a bit of a meeting with the two advisory board members, Angela Davis and Gina Dent, and they said, yeah, you have to use the word justice, not equity or equality, because you can have equity and equality without changing the conditions that created the inequity and inequality in the first place. So when you use the word justice, it implies transformation. So once I could wrap my brain around that, it was easy to put those words together. But I also came to, because our institute, I try not to populate it more than 50% male, and keep that kind of gender balance, because there's so many more young men at the college, of course, trying to study this music. So it's difficult to keep that 50% diversity, but the point is that there'll never be gender justice until everybody invests in that. Until everybody decides that they are responsible in some way for that. It's not women's work. It's got to be about wanting to see, the world, painting the world you want to live in. And so I don't know, like most people I know, at least musicians, would like to consider themselves progressive. So it's not so hard to have these conversations with people and to gently explain to them maybe that they could see some things differently. Because I always come from the point of, I know that they want to see things differently, but the whole world has said it's okay to be the way you are. It's okay to not consider these things. It's okay that if you look at your record collection or the bands the people you hire, the bands you play with, it's all men, and that's okay. Because the world has said this is men's music. And when I look at that, especially now that I'm more aware, it all says I shouldn't be there. And the next young woman shouldn't be there. So those are the things that, because when you are doing things, you're plowing through, and you're not necessarily paying attention
Right.
to all that because it can immobilize you.
Right.
So
Plus
I never.
you're just working so hard on moving
Yeah,
forward.
and it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. Let's start
It's
there.
hard.
I remember having a conversation with Jerry Allen and saying, I don't know, I'm getting, um, not disappointed, but weary. I don't know, maybe that's a better word. The young musicians at these colleges said, they don't really want to learn these traditions. They don't want to learn bebop and then move, to these other places that they want to be. They don't see the value in understanding these traditions and learning them, even learning the tunes, because everybody's pulling out books to read them. They don't know tunes anymore. And so you can start belly aching about stuff like that. And when I said, why do you think that is to Jerry? She said, because it's hard.
Right. Every time.
So I think about that, because when you have to work so hard to learn something, you don't have the time or space. It's really an extra burden to have to deal with all of this stuff that really doesn't have anything to do with the music itself. So that's really about freedom and this dream or pursuit of happiness that we're all supposed to be promised.
So the mission has broadened yet further, and I know you're very deeply involved with something called Next Jazz Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to explain a little bit about your involvement in that and what that is, how it works, what your hope for it is?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a program that New Music USA and our institute collaborated on and funded by the Mellon Foundation. And I thought, I'm the artistic director, and I thought, what's a way to, create experiences? Because I started thinking about my career and what were the things that helped me become successful. And one of the things I kept coming back to was people giving me an opportunity to learn from them on stage before I was even ready.
Right.
But, you had to show up kind of ready. But for the most part, seeing the potential and seeing that it is important to nurture this potential, especially with people that aren't getting as many opportunities.
We had a moment of that last night with 2 generations of singers in your set. It was really moving.
Yeah, and Christy Dashiell is also in the Next Jazz Legacy this year. So what we do is, what makes this different from other mentorship programs is it's really an apprenticeship program. There's some mentorship too, but jazz is an apprenticeship art form, and you really do have to learn on stage. So we create these opportunities, and I thought, well, what way can I get some of these top musicians to hire women? And I thought, oh, pay them.
Right.
So we found some money, and
Right.
We choose 7 people a year. So this is our 3rd cohort. This is about 120 or so, have applied. I think the first year was 80, and it has gone up every year a little bit. And we can only do 7, but they get money to make a recording or buy equipment or something that they need to do. Then the band leader that they will apprentice with.
Do they pick who they want? Do they pick who they want?
Well, I assist them, yes. They send a list, and I ask for 3 people, and then I'll look at that list. And sometimes it's not the right 3 people, and then I'll call them and make some suggestions or, see the direction that they'd like to go. But one thing that happens every time is they get with somebody that they admire, that they have always dreamt of working with.
They work with 2 different people? Yeah, one is...
Yeah, well, the apprenticeship is with a band leader, and they have to hire them for a certain amount of shows. And then the mentorship is also with... So sometimes they may have a list of people that they want to apprentice with, and then that one of those people may end up being a mentor instead, which still creates an avenue for them to work with the person on some level. So yeah, they have a mentorship, a creative mentor, a band leader apprenticeship, and they have a business mentor.
Yeah.
So it's 3 different relationships.
Yeah. Which I was really struck by that because, right, you don't always get all of that from one mentor. And it's really nice, whether you're a musician or a writer, to be able to pursue the art of what you're doing, but also pursue the business of what you're doing. Like, we don't really love being told, hey, it's great exposure and great opportunity. We like being told, and you will get paid, right? Because that's part of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, business is so far beyond just even that, because I think that can limit our thinking about just the survival aspect of it all, just the feeling like, I need to get paid, and how much do I get paid? And I mean, that's important, but there's so many other areas of business that a musician needs to know to thrive over time, because it's all, it all builds, it's all time. You don't come out the gate knowing any of that, and sometimes things aren't even applicable when you're an emerging artist. So hopefully they're learning some things that will help them down the road.
And this is nothing new. I mean, you mentioned Lil Hardin Armstrong, which many people know only as Louis Armstrong's wife. And Jerry Allen was the person who helped me understand what an influential pianist, arranger, musician Lil Hardin Armstrong was in terms of what she did with her left hand, what her band conception was. People may know she wrote some tunes like Struttin' with Some Barbecue, but she also helped Louis Armstrong understand when he was very young what would be the right next move in terms of band context and career. And that, which is well documented, and that was actually important somewhere in the 1920s. So, yeah, there was that moment last night when you played Unconditional Love, a tune composed by Jerry Allen. And the very first time that I brought you here to this festival, really I had been hoping to get a magnificent trio that was Jerry Allen, Terri Lyne Carrington, and Esperanza Spalding, which, to me, I watched this thing rise into the sky, and we'll never know how far it would have flown because of Jerry Allen's untimely death. But when it was a short period of time, she got ill, she passed away. And so what we ended up doing here at this festival was Terry put together not a tribute band, but a band that played in Jerry's spirit and some of her material. And it's one of the best things I've been involved in this festival. And I get chills just thinking about it. But let's talk a little bit about Jerry, about what it meant to you to play with her, how she affected you musically and personally. And because I feel like she's someone who, she's roughly my age and Wynton Marsalis's age. I used to think 15, 20 years ago, what if Jerry Allen had been in charge of jazz at Lincoln Center? What would that have looked like? But how did Jerry affect you as a musician and a person?
Oh, so many ways. The shame about it is, when you have such access to people and, you're really colleagues. I mean, I met Jerry when I was, I think I played when I was 12 or 13. Keter Betts brought me to D.C., and she was in college at Howard University. And we played at One Step Down for a couple of nights. So my relationship with her started then. So, I mean, she was kind of like a big sister. I think she's about 9 years, maybe 9 years older than me. But we moved to New York. I moved to New York shortly after she did. So we were kind of cutting our teeth a bit at the same time. But she had a lot more focus. She was an artist, already. She was writing all this amazing music, and she was also a scholar.
Yeah.
She had studied Eric Dolphy. She did her master's
dissertation
thesis
on Eric Dolphy.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
On Eric Dolphy, and all these transcriptions, and I can hear it, in her playing, and she was just moving things forward. So she influenced a lot of the interesting pianists that came later, like Jason Moran and Craig Taborn,
Vijay Iyer, who
Vijay,
always talks about her.
David Relis. Yeah, lots of people. So she went through these different stages. And sometimes you return home, so to say. And so the later stage of her career, she kind of went back to her original influences of Herbie Hancock and McCoy Tyner and Cecil Taylor too. Those were her three big ones, I think. She did an album, a tribute to all three of them.
Is it Flying Toward the Light? Is that what it's called? Something like that.
Flying Towards the Sound? Or I don't think it's
It's
definitely
worth
not
checking
right.
out this album. It's not like anything else she did.
Yeah, but for me, we're friends, and I don't think I realized her impact as much until she passed. Even playing with her, I mean, I put that trio together, and I was, always just working, organizing, and not necessarily taking the time to fully understand the impact of what we were doing. And yeah, it was interesting because at the time I wasn't thinking about gender either. So Esperanza and Jerry said, wow, this is a different feeling. I feel like I can let a certain guard down. Something feels different here. And I was like, wow, doesn't feel different to me. Let's just play. But now I understand better what they meant. Not feeling like people are looking at you or paying attention to you in a way that's unwanted from the bandstand or from the audience, and feeling safe, so it allows another kind of vulnerability to come out in the music. And I just never thought about those kinds of things. So now it's a good, some years later, I'm able to start honing in a little more on that kind of stuff. But Jerry, she was just very special all around. She also taught me how you can be, I call her low-key, what did I call her? What did I call it? Like a low-key militant.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
And that is a perfect description.
Yeah.
That's a perfect description.
Musically and personally. But
personally.
she never, her voice was very soft, and she never had to, speak loud. I never really heard her yell ever.
She said a lot through silences, though, when she didn't want to respond.
Yeah.
I mean,
I learned, like, you can actually be your authentic self and be powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. She didn't let the pressure of being a certain way change her, where I see it change other people. Because how are you going to be in this environment without being able to take some swings, like throw some punches? I mean, she did, but it was different. She did it quietly.
Or get excluded from the club if you don't.
Yeah, and she feels like she was,
in some ways.
But
that
right.
That trio, I have the luxury of, I've heard so much music over the years, and I have so much opportunity that I'm never take for granted. But every now and then, a musician comes along or a band comes along where I'm like, oh, unless I have a good reason, I'm just going to hear it every chance like David Varela's solo, I'm going to go hear him any chance I get. That trio that you had with Jerry and Esperanza, any chance to hear, I knew, okay, this is like an event happening, or it's like watching a child grow. And so I experienced that. And it really touches me what you're saying about that experience and what they said. And I think maybe, would I be right in thinking it also has to do with being freed from a different kind of bias, which I think all three of you freed yourself of, that stylistic bias. And I feel like you were way ahead of the curve, or at least really more defiant than others in not getting trapped in, you're supposed to play this kind of jazz or this kind of, if I look at everything you've played, recorded, and produced, even just last night, first several certain amount of minutes, that was challenging, improvised jazz that to many people may have even seemed not in a song form. Later on, we moved through Brazilian music, we moved through Afro-Cuban music, we moved through things that sounded like blues, things that sounded like a jazz-inflected pop song, sometimes within a song, 3 or 4. You know, a lot happened in those 90 minutes across the landscape of style. Was that, did you feel like that trio was free of those shackles too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that that's all that we're trying to do is carve out, you know, find our freedom and carve out opportunities to exist freely. And we can't necessarily do it always in daily life, but we can do it through music. We can do it through art. You know, we can keep expanding in that way and hope that that reflects in our daily lives as well. But it's much, you know, it's much easier to do it through your art. So I think Jerry, Esperanza, and myself were all in that key. It's nothing that we had to talk about, but we knew that everything we had access to, we could bring.
I know when you first started working with Wayne Shorter, that was a period of time where certain people in the industry, and critics and others, were saying, Wayne, you shouldn't be going in that direction, which I think time has shown us how brilliant that music is. And I have to imagine at certain points in your career, didn't you get a certain amount of, hey, either, don't go, or maybe the opposite of, hey, you've done this thing that's more pop, you should just do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, not that necessarily, but I mean, yeah, people have had their opinions, but I've always been pretty, I won't say blinders, but always been able to keep on my path because I have always believed in my ideas. So if other people didn't, I would just, I guess, you know, take the risk anyway or pay the cost or...
Do you feel like there was a cost through the years of going
absolutely. I got it. My first album came out in 1989, beginning of 1989. It was Grammy nominated against Miles Davis, Pat Metheny, Larry Carlton, and John Patitucci that year. So I knew I wasn't going to win. I just didn't know if it would be Miles or Pat. It ended up being Pat Metheny. But then I couldn't get arrested after that album for... like maybe 15 to 20 years, I didn't have another deal, you know, and then I did a record that nobody heard. Well, I did a couple of records that nobody heard, but one was on a label called ACT, a German label.
Yeah, it's a great label.
So that didn't have the same distribution in the States as it did in Europe. And
so what was that? What was that?
Jazz is a Spirit.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah.
And then I did more of a kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, groove, whatever record, called More to Say, which didn't really do much here, but that was more of a produced kind of, you know, George Duke and different people. And then after that, I decided to invest in myself. Well, actually, I invested in myself for Jazz of the Spirit because I couldn't get arrested. And then I sold this project to ACT. But then I went back to this idea of in making the album that you want to make, paying for it, and then trying to license it later. So that's what I did with the Mosaic Project. And every major label turned it down. And you know, I remember Bruce Landval said I was too ambitious.
That's Blue Note Records.
Yeah, and Verve.
But it was a huge success. It was a huge success.
Well, the very last person we took it to was John Burke when he was at Concord.
Right.
And even he was kind of, and that's like, I actually do A&R for him now for Candid. But he said, all women are playing on this? I was like, yeah. He said, let's do it. Because he saw, I think, you know, a theme that could, you know, easily be marketed.
Right.
And he thought it sounded good. But he was the, you know, the last person. I was like, wow, if he doesn't go with this, then we'll probably just have to self-release. You know. So then when it won a Grammy,
Right.
it was a nice way of, it was, you know,
Validation.
poetic justice, I don't know.
Of course, that 1989 album wasn't really your first album because there's TLC and Friends.
Oh,
is
yeah,
that
well, that just came out, yeah.
when you were
Something like-
16?
yeah. George Coleman called me the other day to talk. He heard it. He was like, yeah, it was really sweet.
Honestly, you know, if you check out this album as a drummer, you arrived fully formed there as a drummer.
Yeah.
So-
Hopefully, yeah, I grew some within the next few years. I was 16, I think, when we made that.
I should mention that good and important as New Standards is, Terri Lyne has another band that will have another album coming out early next year that is also very unbound stylistically and has a real, the music and the lyrics reflect some sense of mission or context. So social science. So what can we say about how that band started or what you envision that band as?
Well, first of all, I always wanted to be in a band. And even playing with people like Herbie and Wayne, it was never the same people over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
I was always touring to support a record. So I feel like I've never been in a band more than a couple of months, you know.
Right.
And so I don't know how I would develop I feel like I would have been a much better drummer if I had had that time to grow with people on a certain level. But that's, you know, another story. I did help, you know, a lot of people don't realize this, but I, you know, really basically put together the Wayne Shorter Quartet. I just wasn't then able to do it.
Right.
I was touring with Herbie, and then, you know, one thing led to another. So Brian had replaced me.
But then toward the end of his life, you know, the last Grammy you won was a live album playing in a band led by Wayne.
Another sense of poetic justice. So social science happened because I was touring. At the time, I did Money Jungle, which also won a Grammy for jazz instrumental, which made me the first woman to win in that category. So Aaron Parks was playing piano with that. Gerald Clayton's on the record, but Aaron played the majority of the live gigs, and we would have, you know, these great conversations about what was wrong in the world. And then with the Mosaic Project, and so they would overlap. Sometimes I would tour, you know, some people would want the Mosaic Project, some people would want Money Jungle. So with the Mosaic Project, Matthew Stevens was playing guitar, and I realized I was having some of the same conversations with him. So then we went to China, where I was able to add guitar to the Money Jungle project. So I added, and so then the three of us, we had a day off, and we were just talking all day. But I said, why don't we just do a project? Why don't we do something? So that's how it started. And then I started, you know, going to New York and writing and getting together with Aaron. And some of these songs came out. The first one was Bells. You know, he wrote the music, I wrote the lyric. And then Waiting Game, that song, I wrote that lyric, and that was basically after Trump was elected. And then Bells was for Philando Castile, who was murdered by the police. And then, of course, all this came out right before 2020.
Right.
So it had a, you know, strong impact.
Right.
Due to, you know, the themes that we were talking about, political prisoners, just so many different themes.
Right, but you're especially in lyrics and sometimes rap lyrics, dealing very head-on with issues. Everything from police brutality to homophobia to all right, you know what? I bet that people have some questions for Terri Lyne Carrington. And if you do, you should raise your hand and we will have a microphone for you. Does anyone have a question for Terri Lyne Carrington? Because God knows I have more, but maybe I'm wrong. No,
That's
wait a minute. I don't know.
We got a rigor.
I didn't say do any trumpeters have any questions? Let's let this gentleman go first. Not that there's anything against trumpeter, because I was one when I was a
You
child.
can't have everything against trumpet players. Trumpet players stand for manliness and strength.
We're in trouble.
Yeah.
All
And
right,
various,
all
other
right.
and various other qualities that can be advantageous in life. In fact, I'm wondering on a more human level, because I've seen a lot of jazz. I've seen blues queens and other kinds of jazz artists from the beginnings of this music. I have a picture in Fraser's Gullah Homestay of the Jenkins Orphanage Band, where a lot of women, which is one of the nurseries of jazz music, where a lot of women are performing as instrumentalists.
Which band?
So
I'm
that-
sorry, I didn't hear you.
Jenkins Orphanage Band?
Okay.
Yeah. Edmund Jenkins, great composer, did a lot of work. You're in Charleston. Yeah.
I know where I am.
Jenkins Orphanage Band.
Yeah,
was
Jenkins
very-
Orphanage Band was one of the great bands, one of the great early bands in the 19th century, carried jazz to London and to Europe. It created a lot of music, and a lot of early jazz music comes out of the horns of the Jenkins Orphanage Band. Jabbo Smith, forerunner of Dizzy Gillespie. I had an opportunity to write a book with Dizzy Gillespie called "To Be or Not to Bop." "To Be or Not to Bop" details the work of women jazz musicians like
Mary Lou Williams.
Mary Lou Williams, who gave Dizzy some breaks very early, nice gigs in Harlem when he was trying to start a band. And she was very, very active already as a jazz musician and as a band leader. So this music, the music itself, has always welcomed the leadership of women or anybody else who could play the blues, create the sounds that expanded freedom. We were in a prison society that restricted what you could play and what you could express. But within the music itself, there was always a certain amount of freedom. Now, I'm not saying that everybody was
So let me ask you this.
was a feminist, but I am saying that there are a lot of people who saw women as equal
Okay, enough
and
people?
as equals
Enough people?
and as great creators. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Then
Yeah.
how do you explain the lack of women performers? How do you explain that you can only cite Mary Lou Williams, Lil Hart Armstrong, Jerry Allen, a few women pianists? How do you explain that? How many? Yeah, I'm saying, how do you explain if you're saying that the music always welcomed women? How do you explain what has happened where there's none there really?
Okay.
Well, that's different. Bessie Smith, if we're not talking about singers, first of all,
Right.
I'm talking about instrumentalists. And
Right.
so Bessie Smith and Mamie Smith, they sold a lot of records. That was women entering, music as entertainers. They weren't entering as
Right.
improvisers and creative, improvisers in that way. They were entering as entertainers, which is why they sold
Right.
so many records.
Right.
It was entertaining. But they couldn't travel. So, one of the things is that they couldn't travel. So I think that helped me understand why things went the direction it did. Because when slavery ended and people got their freedom, the biggest thing that, one of the biggest things that happened is now people that were enslaved could travel. And it was not safe. It wasn't safe for men either, but it really wasn't safe for women to travel. So now somebody could go to the next town, play on a corner, make some money, play in a bar or a brothel. And then the bars and brothels weren't places that women should be either, you know. So this is, to me, one of the things that made it so that so many of the musicians, women were not accepted in that way because it wasn't safe and it wasn't ladylike to be in some of those places either.
And thank you for that comment. And that book is an important book. And yeah, one thing you've helped a lot of people understand, Terri Lyne, is that, okay, we might celebrate certain figures. Maybe maybe we'll talk about Alice Coltrane. Maybe we'll give her the respect she deserves.
2 hands.
But there's a landscape of musicians that can be populated. And hey, last night we had great female drummer, great, powerful female bassist. Because I think people used to admit women into singing or maybe playing piano. But I want to...
I would like to know what Etienne, the great Etienne Charles, had to say, because
All right, but
I'm just thrilled that he showed up, because he spent the last day with us, so most of the time musicians don't come to these types of things. So thank you for coming, and thank you for playing so great last night.
Thank you. I just had a question. You are part of a very special crew of musicians, including Miles Davis, Quincy Jones, Dianne Reeves, among quite a few others who were mentored by the late, great Clark Terry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could just talk a little bit about your time and energy with Clark, because he inspired so many of us. And a lot of people don't know the breadth of his mentorship, including Miles and Quincy. And so if you could please talk about Clark.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. He was one of the first people I sat in with when he would come through Boston. And every time he came through, he would want to see how I, developed. So from maybe 8, 9 years old, and then when I was 10, he gave me my first gig that I ever got paid for. I flew to Wichita, Kansas, to be a guest with him, with his East Coast, West Coast Giants, which consisted of Eddie Lockjaw Davis, Al Cohen, Jimmy Rouse, George DeVivier, Garnett Brown, and Louis Bellson. And he had Dianne Reeves and myself as a guest. So last night when I introduced Dianne, I said she's been my friend for 48 years. I'm 58, I'll be 59, so 48 or 49 years, because I was 10 when I met her. And it was through Clark Terry, and he mentored her, as you said, as well. But he was just a great teacher. And then actually, as I was 10, but then when, I kept this relationship with him, he would send me postcards and all that. But when I was 17, I started Berkeley, and I got a little bored at 18, because I had been going since I was 11. And Clark said, well, when you come to New York, you got a gig. And I don't know who his drummer was at the time, but, when I got there, as soon as I got to New York, I called him, and he took me to Europe that summer. I arrived in the fall, in the spring, and he took me to Europe that summer. So I played with him for about 2 years. And gosh, it's kind of like the school of Ellingtonia, as he would call it. And you start learning, just things about the business. Just even, some of my memories of, going to France for the first time, with Clark, and learning about cassoulet and eating snails for the first time, escargot, and he was always, turning me on to something, and going to Chan Parker's house, taking us really cool places. Chan Parker is Charlie Parker's, was Charlie Parker's wife. And, just about strolling. I didn't think I had ever heard that word. He said, stroll. I had to know what that meant. So I think that means don't play. Just things that he needed. If my hi-hat started, because I always wanted to, because at the same time I'm listening to Jack DeJohnette and all this other music stylistically, and trying to play like that. So I don't like keeping the hi-hat on 2 and 4. But I noticed sometimes if I didn't do that, it would throw his music off, So, I knew I had to do that. And then, you had to know that moment of when to smack that rim shot on 2 and 4 as well, because that's, those are the things that he needed. Yeah, and then his last recording was on my record Money Jungle, and I flew to Arkansas shortly after his leg was amputated, and he couldn't really play anymore. So he played a few notes, and I realized it wasn't really, he wasn't really able to play. And so we were packing up the recording equipment, and he said, "Let me sing."
Right.
And yeah, he did a whole little scat thing, and it was beautiful. And then they actually had packed up the equipment at this point, and then he said, "I got one more thing to say." So I pulled out my computer, because the real equipment had just been packed up. And I pulled out my computer without any microphone plugged in or anything, just the computer mic inside of a laptop. And I said, "Okay," and I pressed record in GarageBand. And he did this cadenza, and it ended up on the record. Like, it sounds like it was recorded with the same mic, that you would record, like this or whatever, Yeah, so he was really important to me, and really amazing teacher with, I played drums, so it wasn't the same, but, I watched him with other people, and, it's about phrasing and, where you put the weight on notes and accents, and learning, lyrics, and, he knew the lyrics to songs. Yeah, really a person concerned about the future of the music.
We don't have the time for it, but we're not going to tell this story, but wasn't he the person who brought you to crusty old Buddy Rich, who gave it up for you? Wasn't that Clyde?
Oh, yeah.
I think, do we have one more
Yeah.
question over here? We got one more question.
Okay.
and
We
then
can
we're
do two.
gonna-
We can do two of those two. We don't want to fight over it.
Okay, I've heard you for quite a while, and you're so fluent in so many different styles. I wonder who your early influences were, artists, recordings, what really gave you the insight, to be that versatile.
Well, I think it was really just a desire to pay attention to the music of my generation, as well as to the traditions that I was learning. Because when I grew up, 70s, I was listening to Michael Jackson and Earth, Wind and Fire and Prince, and as well as so many other people. And then, eventually Joni Mitchell and the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix, and just, just all, I loved English rock, and so it was all these different things that I was attracted to. And I remember one day, actually, I was touring in Japan with Wayne, and we were on a bill with Pat Metheny and Miles and Jack DeJohnette's band, and it was really a cool thing that used to happen in Japan called Live Under the Sky, where you would tour with all of these bands. So we would go for like 2 weeks and go to 4 or 5 cities with the same groups. But anyway, Pat Metheny, I was having ramen noodles with him, and he said, once you really figure out how to put all of those things together that you do, it's really going to be great. Like once you really figure out like how to, like all these different influences, like jazz, commercial, music, singing. And I didn't feel like I really did that until the Mosaic Project. And when I did that, I felt like, finally I get what Pat was saying. But then when I mentioned it to him, of course, he didn't remember that he had said that. But it definitely left something in my mind. But it was really just the influences of all the things I was listening to. And then I got the Arsenio Hall TV show and had to play these things. I had to play with Bobby Brown or New Kids on the Block, or and as well as Nancy Wilson came on the show once, or even Branford came on as a guest once. So you had to play all these different things. So I felt a bit prepared for that, not fully prepared, because I'm not going to play gospel-oriented music like somebody that grew up doing that, you know. But it is interesting because people put you in these boxes. So, you know, I got 2 late-night TV shows. The second one was the Vibe TV show, Quincy Jones production. And even Quincy, like, I mean, see, he's not doing the homework like Etienne. He didn't even know that I was a protege of sorts of Clark's. And so he had decided to bring Clark on the Vibe TV show as a guest, and was going to do a big band arrangement. For some reason, it never happened. Maybe Clark got sick, I don't remember, but it never happened. But he had planned it, and he hired John Robinson to play drums. I was like, wow. Wow, that's really deep. I mean, no shade to John Robinson. You know, he was great with Rufus, but I'm sitting right there, and you're going to have John Robinson play drums with Clark Terry? It was really, that's when I was like, this business, wow, okay. But anyway, versatility has always been important to me, so thanks for recognizing that.
All right, we promised one last question.
Well, given the fact that jazz is such a beautiful gift to the world, American jazz, and I didn't grow up in this country, my question to you is, before actually kids reach college age, what is the exposure they receive actually in this country in public schools? Do you think that that is the right place actually to expose them, and male and females act in freedom at that age? You're freer actually to express yourself. And if that is an interest of yours, that was my next question, if your college, your institute actually is helping carrying kids.
You mean kids in public
Kids
schools?
in public schools, middle and high school.
Yeah, well, that's where the problem starts, absolutely. The matriculation of women from middle school to high school, then high school to college, and college to the professional world is really bad. It gets worse each time because it's not fun. It starts off as something as fun, you know, in middle school, but then quickly it becomes less and less fun for women. And that's why the matriculation, I mean, it's starting to change, which is great, but definitely, you know, middle band directors, middle school band directors are a big part of the problem, high school band directors, for sure. But what's interesting about your question to me is there's a lot of jazz being taught in high schools, certain high schools with programs that support this. And I mean, learning jazz opposed to learning marching band or something is going to be a lot more rigorous, so to say. It's going to be a bit harder, especially, you know, when it comes to improvising, right? So what happens, and this is, you know, a thing that's been on my mind for the last, I don't know, 10 years or 15 years, because I'm collecting a check from a college, an institution. So I have a summer program that's for high school students. So I'm seeing what's happening with who gets to study this music. And it's mostly cities with resources, people with resources, because they can have the instruments, they can have the lessons, they can have a school that has a robust music program, and then you have inner city schools that they may not even have music because it's not a priority. They're trying to survive. So it really affects who not only, who plays it, who gets into these kind of elite summer programs, and it's really a travesty because everybody knows that jazz was created by African Americans, and now we can't learn it in high school or middle school. We don't have the instruments. We don't. I'm speaking generally. Of course, the world is not just that cut and dry. But when I'm looking at who's coming to the summer programs at Berkeley, it's not women and it's not African Americans. So, yes, I'm interested in that. We have done outreach programs to Boston Arts Academy, but that's all we can handle at the moment because that's a whole nother world, you know what I mean? Outreach and going into middle schools and high schools. So Boston Arts Academy is a high school. But they were already kind of ahead of the game because they're at an arts high school. But they still don't know jazz, and that's another problem, not interested in jazz because, so much of jazz is not presented, especially in these high school programs, it's presented as old, traditional music that's not necessarily appealing to young people either. And so we have to also figure out how to come to people a bit more on their terms or with what their interests are. You know what I mean? So there's a whole lot of things with what you're asking about. And it's been on my mind, so thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I will just add that, if you want culture in schools, well, let's fight for that. Same way we might fight for other things. And if you're teaching music, or if you're teaching American cultural history, we have another book called New Standards that can be distributed through schools. I want to thank the musicians like Etienne who've shown up here, and we have two fine local musicians, at least two that are here, so I feel like Charleston's in good shape. I really want to thank you for not only coming to hear live music, but coming to hear live people talking about music. This is a big deal in the year 2024. But most of all, I want to I keep inviting her back and keep dragging her back, and Terri Lyne Carrington will be back again, but we're going to have to wave goodbye to her. So she's been so generous in all ways here. Please help me thank Terri Lyne Carrington.
Thank you. Thanks, Larry.
All right. Till the next one, right?